Um, Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're going to spend a little time talking about fertilizer. And as you can see, it's not just a bunch of bull. Well, at least we hope it's not anyway. So let's do a little homework first, a little setup. Who am I? Dave did a nice job of introducing me. Thank you, Dave. But I'll go through the screen anyway. I'm a CR since 1995, a Master Rosarian since 2005. The current chair of the Southwest District, a horticultural judge. I was a 7-term past president of the Orange County Rose Society, not 7 consecutive years, but 3 2-year terms, and then they roped me into doing it one more time. Current Rose Show chair of Orange County Rose Society. My background is in the computer industry. I spent 47 years there. The last 37 of those were in software development, and I retired in 2006, and I am loving every minute of it. So let's do a little fertilizer presentation key information here for those who are taking the test. Since this presentation is part of a CR school, it is focused on the contents of the current CR manual, and if you have one, the most current is October of 2019, so you can double check that. But there were minor changes to the last version, so you should be good to go if you have a later edition, an earlier edition rather. If you'll be sitting for the CR exam and you see the following, a left to right arrow, large arrow, or a right to left, large arrow, you may want to wake up and take a note. Okay, so your dosing time will be over at that point. So that's for you who are taking the exam. So let's get started with this. What is fertilizer? From the American Heritage Science Dictionary, fertilizer is defined as any of a large number of natural and synthetic materials, including manure and compounds, containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, spread on or worked into soil to increase its capacity to support plant growth. So, and here's a chart that Laura did in the soils presentation, and we'll go over it very quickly once again because she did such an outstanding job. There's no need to spend a lot of time on it. But here's plant metabolism, and this is the photosynthesis, and I need a drink of water. This is photosynthesis side. Takes carbon dioxide out of the air, plus water in the form of rain, plus energy in the form of sunlight, and creates sugar and oxygen. And you can see how it comes down at the atmospheric nitrogen, washed into the soil. The soil, there are compounds in the soil that work on it. And this is all about nitrogen at this point. So you have ammonium salts, and the compounds change it to nitrates, then nitrites, and then nitrates, which is the form of nitrogen that the plant actually uses. You're going to lose some by leaching and some by denitrifiers. Denitrifiers are caused by a lack of oxygen in the soil, so you lose some back up into the atmosphere. And that cycle just continues. And then there is excreta and dead bodies that fall into the process, and the dead organic matter and all the nitrogen and the compounds from the rain. And that process is photosynthesis, and that creates the nice green bushes that we love. And here's respiration. The bottom half of the plants don't have the sunlight, those that are underground and plus the microbes in the soil don't have the sunlight for their energy source. So the reverse of photosynthesis is respiration. And that takes sugar and oxygen in the soil and converts it to carbon dioxide and water and energy. And that's how the lower half of the plant actually gets its strength and nutrients. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about plant elements. As much as 95% of a plant is made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These nutrients are obtained from the air in the form of carbon dioxide and from water. The remaining nutrients are obtained from the soil. There's a little chart showing them. Oxygen and carbon make up 89%, the hydrogen 6%. And what we call the macronutrients of nitrogen, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, sulfur, and magnesium are in what 4.8 range. So that totals up to 99.8% of the components of a plant. And the micronutrients make up the rest, and that's only a tiny little part. That's what, 0.2. Okay, types of fertilizer. Chemical fertilizers are synthetically produced. All chemical fertilizers are salts, and all salts interfere with the ability of the plant to obtain water. Heavy applications of chemical fertilizers will cause burn on the leaves, similar to not watering a plant during hot weather. Then there are organic fertilizers. They come from once living organisms. They're low in nutrient content and slow release, requiring biological action from the soil to release the nutrients. This feeds the soil life, keeping the soil healthy, able to hold air, nutrients, and water. And some examples of that are manures, fish emulsion, alfalfa meal, cottonseed meal, and all the other meals that you can buy. A little note, never apply fertilizer to dry soil, especially chemical fertilizers. Roses should always be watered before and after an application of a chemical fertilizer. The existing salt level in the soil can also contribute to the burning effects of adding chemical fertilizers, so we have to be careful. And plants use nutrients in their ionic form, so it does not matter from what source the nutrient originated. But once it goes through the process of decomposing and being converted to its different forms, once it's in the ionic form, then the plant can take it up. Before that, it's not available, and the plant really doesn't care where it came from. I've never had a plant, a rose bush, tell me, hey, get that tomato fertilizer out of here. I'm a rose. For those of you who are taking the test, there's a little note for you. You might want to pay attention to that. All fertilizers list the NPK ratio, which represents the percent by weight of each element. Here's a bag of fertilizer sitting out there. This is good old web food, made in the West for the West. And I have actually never seen web food. So here's the first number is nitrogen, and in this case it says it's 10% of the bag. Phosphorus is rated at 20%. And potassium is at 20%. So you're going to say that only adds up to 50%, Tom. No, what's going on here? The rest of it is filler. So whatever the manufacturer has laying around that they want to throw in the bag, that's what you get. Again, for those taking the test, you might pay attention to this. Spend a little bit of time talking about nitrogen. What does nitrogen do? It fuels growth of the plant. It gives plant tall, strong canes. And healthy plants that have rich dark green foliage. If it's lacking, what is it? Foliage gets light green to almost yellow. And too much, it's not good either. You can burn a plant by giving it too much nitrogen, and you wind up with weak canes and small blooms. Phosphorus stimulates root growth, helps produce a quality plant with big blooms. It may hasten plant maturity and aid in winter hardiness. They can get locked up in very acidic soils, and they move slowly, about an inch a year. And newly planted roses need it at their roots, and many Rosarians add superphosphate 0,45,0 to the bottom of the hole when they're planting a rose, especially bare roots. And another note for those who are taking the test. Potassium promotes all-around growth, gives vigor and bloom color. Essential in development of chlorophyll by encouraging photosynthesis. So that process we saw earlier, potassium is very important to that process. And it aids in moving nutrients through the plant. It moves very quickly through the soil, so it needs to be replenished on a regular basis. And no test takers, there's a little note for you. You look at that while I take a sip. Okay, let's take a look at a fertilizer bag again and the analysis portion of it. Okay, here's one that's 15, 15, 10, the guaranteed analysis. I don't know what happens if you say it isn't 15% and you check it out. What do they do? I don't know. The big three NPKs, total nitrogen here is 4.7% ammoniacal nitrogen, 9.6% of urea, and 0.55 of water insoluble nitrogen. Now, what is water insoluble nitrogen? It's nitrogen that does not dissolve when added to water, when this product is added to water. So if you see WIN on a bag, you'll know that it's not completely water soluble. But if WIN is not on the bag, you can be guaranteed that the entire bag is water soluble. Okay, and here we have potash was at 10% and available phosphate is at 15%. Secondary nutrients, they tell you magnesium and sulfur make up 1, 6, 7, 8, 8.5, 8.25%, something like that. And the micronutrients of boron, copper, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc are small in the percentage of the bag, and that's why we call them micronutrients. You don't need a lot. For those of you taking the test, you might want to pay attention to water insoluble nitrogen, and it's usually indicated as WIN. Secondary macronutrients, calcium, holds cell walls together and makes a sturdier plant. Magnesium is a very essential part of chlorophyll production for greener, healthier plants and helps to regulate the uptake of nutrients. You might want to pay attention to that because I hit the thing twice. Sulfur used in development of proteins needed for plant health and then also helps to lower the pH. And minor micronutrients, often referred to as trace elements. And only small amounts are needed in the diet of a rose. But a lack of one or more may cause a serious decrease in the availability of major elements. So even though they may be there, if they don't have the proper balance of micronutrients, they may not be available. And for the test takers, there's another note. Here's iron. It aids in chlorophyll formation, and sugar-burning enzymes. Manganese aids chlorophyll formation and helps photosynthesis. A lot of that going on. So a lot of these just helping the photosynthesis process. And zinc stimulates stem growth and flower formation. And there's a reminder for the note for the test takers. The micronutrients continued. We have boron, controls starch formation, stimulates cell division and flower formation. Copper stimulates stem development. Molybdenum needed to make amino acid and stimulate plant growth and vigor. And a little note for boron. This is the question I missed on the test. It's the only question I missed. So if you're like me, you might want to pay attention to that one. Okay, the forms of fertilizer. It's granular, designed to be scratched into the soil, and it may also be water soluble. So if it doesn't say WIN on the bag, it's completely water soluble. Remember that. Powdered, designed to be dissolved in water for liquid feeding and to the soil or foliage. and liquid, usually concentrated form, to be mixed with water. Solid, usually spikes to push into soil around the plant, very slow to dissolve. Honestly, I haven't seen many for roses. I do see them in the big box stores. It's usually sold as tree spikes, but again, the plants don't know the difference. So if you want to stick one next to your rose bush and let it dissolve slowly, so you don't have to worry about fertilizing, it's an option for you. Just be sure what the NPK is when you put it in. Okay, here's a table of common natural fertilizers and their nutritive values, and some little comments on the side. We'll take a look at a few. Dried blood, or blood meal, it's known in stores. Pretty high in nitrogen for an organic fertilizer, 12%. That doesn't have anything else, and it's highly available. So a lot of citrus growers use this 2 or 3 times a year as their feed, and nothing else. So just getting nitrogen to the citrus. Here's fish meal again, a little on the higher side for an organic, but it's a little more balanced, and the comment says it may attract pests, but it's highly available as well. Cottonseed meal, getting more balanced here at 7, 2.5, 2, and it's highly available, but it may contain pesticide residues. So be careful when you're buying it. Make sure you know what you're getting. And hen manure, 1.8, 1, and 0.5. Make sure it's rotted and not dehydrated. And I'm an inner city kid, and I didn't know that roosters didn't produce manure. Apparently only hens produce manure. So, but again, I'm a city boy, so what do I know? And there's sludge. So look over on the right-hand side, there's an arrow. It says it may contain toxic metals. So when you're buying sludge, I know there are some good products on the market that are silver sludge. Just be careful which ones you're buying, and be sure you know where they came from and how clean they are. And a little note, human, cat, and dog feces should not be used due to the danger of disease, of course. And something in the situation we're in our country right now, you want to pay attention to that. Okay, a little bit about the pH of the soil. Now, Laura did a great job of this 2 weeks ago. So we'll run through it quickly again, because it is important to understand the relationship between the soil pH and the availability of nutrients. Okay. pH is a measure of the acidity or alkalinity of the soil. And it's a logarithmic scale based on the powers of 10. So a pH of 5 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 6. And a pH of 5 is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 7. So you got the jump from 5 to 6 is 10 times 10. And then you make the jump from 6 to 7, so it's 10 times the previous 10 is where you get the 100. And almost all fertilizers, both chemical and organic, tend to make the soil more acidic. And roses do best in a slightly acidic soil. So that's in the 6 to 6.5 range, which on the next slide, we'll say a pH of 7 is neutral. Below it is acidic, above it is alkaline. And roses will tolerate a wide range from 5.5 to 7.8. That's a pretty wide range. And you need to test and adjust the pH if needed, because roses do best in a slightly acidic soil with a pH of 6 to 6.5. So even though you may be able to grow roses decently at the 5.5 level, you probably want to get it a little more alkaline. And if it's way up at 7.8, that's getting pretty alkaline, and you want to bring it back down to 6 to 6.5. And a little reminder for our test takers. Okay, here's a chart that Laura did a good job of going over last time, and just shows the availability versus soil pH of different nutrients.
Never could get the sound
nitrogen.
on they told me how to get it on the phone.
Hello. Nutrient availability for nitrogen in the 6 to 6.5 range is just about fully available. You can see that it stays readily available through the 7, 7.5. And 8, once it gets into 8, it starts to drop off a little bit. And once it goes more acidic, it starts to drop off pretty quickly. Phosphorus, again, stays readily available in the 6 to 6.5 range in our, we'll call it the hot spot or sweet spot. And as it gets a little more alkaline, it's still available. It drops off pretty quickly on the acidic side. And potassium stays pretty much available all through the different zones, except when you get highly acid. And the same goes for sulfur and calcium. Magnesium, on the other hand, well, actually stays in this. Magnesium is up there with calcium. It drops a little bit off. What would be, that would be about 6.2 somewhere. And iron, very available in the acidic soil, but starts to drop off a little bit as it goes alkaline. That's probably why we have to add more iron to our soils as we go through the growing season. And magnesium stays readily available, more available in acidic soils than in alkaline soils. And borons, about the same. Copper and zinc, the same. Molybdenum starts to drop off pretty quickly, even when you get into the 6.5 to 6 range. And ammonium, it's not very available at all, is it? Not very much, but enough, I guess. How to keep pH correct. If the soil is acidic, you want to add lime to increase the pH. It takes time to change the pH, so do it over winter. It'll still do its process, even though you're not actively growing roses, but it's working. And you use the soil test to determine the level of magnesium for the type of limestone you want to add. So you test to see how much magnesium is in your soil, and that will dictate whether you use calcitic lime or dolomite lime. Okay. If you're sufficient, you can use calcitic. If you're a little low, you probably want to use dolomitic. And if you're getting a soil test from a reputable soil tester, they'll tell you what type to use. If soil is alkaline, add compost, peat moss, organics to slightly lower the pH. And that's a slow and usually ongoing process. So just constantly adding compost, and it's one of the best reasons to be adding mulch to your gardens. And add sulfur if you want a quicker lowering. Fertilizers are broadly divided into organic, and I prefer the term inorganic as opposed to chemical, since most things are chemicals anyway. Okay. Includes those which, or we'll talk about organics, includes those which come from living organisms. And all organics fertilizers tend to have these in common. They tend to be very low in nutrient content. They tend to be slow release form, needing warm soil to activate. And they tend to have high levels of carbon. And they slowly add to the level of humus in the soil. Inorganic fertilizers can be granular, liquid, powdered, or solid form, or composed of synthetic chemicals and or minerals. And in general, all chemical fertilizers are salts, which can interfere with water availability to the roots if too much builds up in the soil. And the elements are quick acting and readily available. Plants can't tell the difference between inorganic and organic. They stated that before. Once it gets down to the ionic form, then they don't care. They just don't know. And on the right-hand side is arrow for those of you who are taking the test. And I just had a test. I had a question passed to me from my wife. It says, if you're on the phone, how are you going to get this information, photos and charts? If you contact me, I can send you a copy of this, and we can talk about that later, I think. Types of fertilizers. A little quick rundown of the characteristics. Soluble inorganic. They're immediately available. They last 3 to 4 weeks. They can burn foliage. They can leach from the soil, and there's no carryover from season to season. The benefit is there's no odor. They're a high nutrient content. They have high efficiency, and they're concentrated. Natural and organic fertilizers are readily available. Lasts 4 to 6 weeks. Does not burn. Leaches from the soil with a little carryover. Odor might be offensive. Low nutrient content, low efficiency, and bulky. And the odor might be offensive is things like chicken manure, cow manure, steer manure, even fish. You know, use a lot of liquid fish, and cats in the neighborhood tend to come and visit. Urea form, slowly available, lasts 20 to 24 weeks, long time. Does not burn, does not leach, and there is significant carryover into the following season. There's no odor. It's high nutrient content, high efficiency, and concentrated. Therefore, more expensive. Okay, commonly used organic materials. Cottonseed meal is good for use on high pH soil, as acidic action tends to lower the pH while providing nutrients. Blood meal rich in nitrogen. It may do harm if used in excess, so be careful when using it. I can't tell you how many azaleas I have burned by putting too much blood meal on them. Also supplies some essential trace elements, including iron. Bone meal, slow acting release of phosphorus. And my mother-in-law used to swear that makes the oranges taste sweet. Alfalfa meal contains trichomptol, a natural growth stimulant. It can be mixed into the soil or used as a tea, if you don't mind a little odor from the tea. And there's compost, boosts the level of organic matter and the overall fertility of the soil. And be careful with the alfalfa meal, because that growth stimulant does a good job of forcing it, so you don't want to be using it too much, or you'll get lots of growth and no blooms. A few more common organics: fish emulsion, a good source of nitrogen and several trace elements. Strong solution can burn plants, even though it's organic, particularly those that are in containers. So good stuff, but be careful when you're using it. And I know a lot of exhibitors that swear that it really helps the bloom color. Mushroom compost, if you can find it anymore. Good slow release fertilizer when mixed into the soil or as a mulch. It has an NPK ratio of 2:1 and a pH of 6.8. So it's good stuff if you can find it. Seaweed or kelp extracts, good source of trace elements. And manures, complete fertilizer, but low in amounts it can supply. Best to age, as fresh manure can burn tender roots. And it can also harbor bacterial harmful to humans. So again, be careful with it and make sure you're getting aged. Well-rotted manure. And we use horse manure out here, and if it isn't really well rotted, you wind up with a lot of weed seeds as well. Treated sewage biosolids, general purpose, long-lasting, non-burning, but can contain heavy metals that can be toxic in the soil. So again, you can use it, but be careful what you're buying. Make sure you're getting a good quality product that's been well treated. Another type of fertilizer is slow release fertilizer. And they release nutrients over a period of time from immediately up to 9 months. Why would you want a slow release that releases immediately? I'm not sure, but that's what it is. Works in conjunction with processes in the soil and can be activated by temperature, moisture, bacterial activity in the soil, or pH, and this all depends on the type of coating they use. So they make a pellet of a general purpose fertilizer and they put a coating on it, and then it's the coating. As the coating deteriorates based on the type of material it is, it releases slowly into the ground, releases its contents slowly. Major advantage, it reduces the chance of fertilizer burn, which is being released slowly. And there are some cautions. Timing, the plant growth may go late into fall if you use it late in the season. And too much water, the nutrients release too fast if it's a coating that's released by water, dissolved in water. Slow release versus conventional comparison. Slow release fertilizer, the advantages are fewer applications and has a low burn potential. Release rates vary depending on the fertilizer characteristics, and they are comparatively slow release rates. Disadvantages, unit costs are high, much more expensive than a bag of fertilizer. Availability is limited. Release rate is governed by by factors other than the plant's needs. So you're putting it into the ground based on how it's being released, how that coating is dissolving, not by what the plant needs. Conventional fertilizers have advantages of being fast acting, some are acid forming, and low cost, comparatively lower cost. The disadvantages are greater burn potential, solidifies in the bag when wet, and they leach readily. And manures or sewer sludge, their advantages are low burn potential, relatively slow release, contain micronutrients, and they help to condition soil. The disadvantages are salt buildup can be a problem. They're bulky and difficult to handle, usually in 50-pound bags or so. They may have an odor if they haven't been deodorized. They are expensive per pound of actual nutrient. Weed seeds can be a problem, and heavy metals may be present in sewage sludge, as we stated before. Okay, forms of nitrogen. Nitrate nitrogen is the most available and the fastest acting without any change in the soil. Very little change in the soil, I should say. Okay. Ammoniacal is slightly available, but it must be changed into nitrate form for plant take-up, so it has to go through a biological change. And urea is the slowest available, must undergo major soil action. And nitrate is rarely used because it's super expensive. In fact, I've never even seen it on sale in the places that I go. For those of you who are sitting for the test, there's a little note for you to highlight in your book. Okay, let's take a look at frequently observed nutrient imbalances. These are the 4 most observed imbalances. There are others, and didn't want to spend a lot of time on doing all of them. So if you are interested in something other than these 4, you grab your CR manual, and there are some pictures in there. They're not the best pictures in the world, I have to admit, and we're going to be working on those as we get further on in changing some of the manual sections. But these 4 are the 4 that most people see. Nitrogen deficiency. The leaves show a pale yellow, green color. The plant is stunted with smaller stems. And there's a picture of one that you can see how the color is not a deep green, and you can see the veins through it, and they're starting to go yellow. oxygen deficiency. The symptoms are similar to nitrogen deficiency, but adding nitrogen will not correct the problem. Caused by a lack of air to the roots, typically caused by overwatering or poor drainage. The veins of the leaf will show chlorosis, followed by an intervenal chlorosis. And here's the picture of one. And there's a arrow pointing to the chlorotic vein. So the veins are going yellow, and the leaf itself is still staying somewhat green. And then eventually, the whole thing will turn yellow and drop. And for the test takers, there's a little note you want to pay attention to. Nutrient imbalances continues. Iron deficiency. Opposite look of oxygen deficiency. The areas between the veins show yellowing and the vein remains green. And we've all seen that, knowing that we have to get some iron in the soil. A lot of yellowing, but those veins stay nice and green. And then there's leaf burn, and this can be caused by lots of things. Edges turn brown from lack of water, maybe over fertilizing, heat stress, spray burn, etc., etc., etc. But everybody gets them, and there's different reasons for it. So you actually have to do a little bit of homework and pay attention to what's going on in your garden to notice it. But I'll show you one. Here's some heat stress. When the temperatures get up into the hundreds, in Arizona, they cover them up with shade cloth. Here in California, we're not that smart. We just let the heat go, and this is what we wind up, especially if we don't water enough. Got to give them extra water. But even at that, when temperature reaches a certain point, the plants stop taking up the water. So, but we do get heat stress. Many are problems of availability, not supply. So you're putting it in the ground, but it's not. Plants are not getting it. So soil test versus a tissue sample. I want to spend a little time on this because you can do a soil test, and it's highly recommended, and I recommend it as well. And you find out what is in your soil, what nutrients are there, what nutrients are you lacking, and then you adjust it, and you do what you're supposed to do, and you put it in, but you're possibly still having the same problems. And the only way to really know is to have a tissue sample taken. And most of the extension agencies that do soil tests will do a tissue sample for you. And a little more expensive, but if you really want to know what the plant is taking up, and this is the only way to do it. The tissue sample will tell you what the plant has taken up out of the soil and what it's using in its photosynthesis process. So just a little information for you. You may know what's in the ground, but you don't know what the plant is actually using. Nutrients may be present in the soil, but are unavailable because of the pH range. So that may be one of the reasons. You put everything in there, but your pH range is out of balance, either too high or too low. And if you go back to the chart that we looked at, you can see that they're not. It may be in the soil, but it's not available because in that pH range, it just doesn't take it up. Generally, micronutrient deficiencies are rarely seen, so that's something you really have to worry about. Symptoms of nutrient deficiencies that affect mature or older leaves first. And usually it's nitrogen, magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium that show up first in the older leaves. And the younger plants parts first, iron, magnesium, boron, copper, calcium, zinc, and molybdenum are the culprits. So as a CR, what do you want to do? You're out on a consult looking at somebody's leaves, and you see some leaves that are showing signs of a deficiency, but is it the older leaf or the newer leaf? Is it the young part of the plant? that may give you a hint as to what the deficiency is. So be observant when you go in and give the consult and pay attention to where the leaves are on the plant. Use available resources. For example, you can take your CR manual with you. You can look on the internet, etc., and identify the symptoms, confirm the diagnosis, and then treat. So first thing you do is look at the plant. Where is it having its problems? Is it the older leaves and newer leaves? Think about what nutrients might be deficient. Take a look in your CR manual and see if that agrees with what's in the book. Or go online and actually pick the CR manual up on your tablet, and then take a look at it and confirm the diagnosis, and then offer treatment to the I won't say client, but the person you're giving the consult to. And for those taking the test, you want to pay a little bit of attention to affecting the mature older leaves first. Let's talk a little bit about the effects of soil salts. In heavily fertilized roses, accumulation of soluble salts is not uncommon. They may interfere with the water availability in the root zone. And the higher the salt content in the soil, the greater the stress on the plant to obtain moisture from the soil. So what the soil is doing is it's taking the moisture out of the soil and not making it available for the plant to take that. And this is usually a sign of either organics that have soil buildup, like manures, or in chemical fertilizers. Roses growing in soils having high salt concentrations tend to induce physiological drought in plants. So they create their own drought because through the process, the soil is taking the water out of the soil, and it intensifies as the moisture content of the soil decreases. So as the salt absorbs the water and it leaves less in the soil, the drought symptoms get worse and worse. Many of the inorganic fertilizers commonly used on roses can produce a high salt index. However, when applied in suitable amounts, the soil effect is usually not a problem. So that's basically telling you don't over fertilize. Don't double it. If it says add a tablespoon to a gallon of water, add a tablespoon to a gallon of water. Don't add 2 or 3 and say, I think we need a little bit more, because you're possibly causing salt buildup. It is important for rose growers to appreciate the importance of water in the use of fertilizer material capable of inducing high salt effects, and that's mostly the chemicals. So small applications of water tend to dissolve the fertilizer, and that's fine. You get it, you put it in a bucket, and you mix it in, and so all dissolved, and you think you're good, and you put it in the soil. And the salt concentration in the roots might increase. So what do you want to do? Applications of water, which cause some, but not too much leaching, tend to affect the loss of such materials as sulfates and the chlorides, which is the problem, with a little loss of ammonium or potassium, thus minimizing an increase of salts. So you put enough water to flush out the sulfides and chlorides, but not so much that you're going to wash everything out. Such watering gives good distribution of applied fertilizers, so it moves it through the root zone. And this is why one should never feed roses if the soil is dry, and have adequate watering should be done after fertilizing. So water before, add your fertilizer, and then water after. And that can be a day apart. It doesn't have to be all in the same day. But just as long as the soil is moist, add your fertilizer in, and then you follow it up within, say, 24 hours with another watering. Okay, some do's and don'ts. Do test your soil. If the pH is way out of the 6.0 to 6.5 range, it's important. Nutrients in the soil may be unavailable to the plant. Soil must be warmed before using chemical fertilizers to activate the microorganisms, not just inorganic chemical fertilizers, but I mean, not just chemical. Let me say that again. Not just organic fertilizers need warm soil, but the chemical fertilizers also need a little bit of warmth in the soil. Otherwise, it just leaches into the soil and can get into the water sources. Constant use of chemical fertilizers without adding organic material can deteriorate the soil structure and its overall health. So it's very important to get organics into your feeding program. Don't rely strictly on chemical fertilizers. Do feed often, but don't overdo it. A schedule of every 4 to 6 weeks is adequate, unless you're an exhibitor, and then we go crazy. But be conservative in what you do. More is not always better. Do water deep before and after fertilizing. This is a must. It helps to dilute so as not to burn, plus it helps move nutrients into the root zone. Before looking into plant diseases and deficiencies, check to see what the individual is using for pest control, because that can have a very strong effect on what's happening to the plant. So you may see some burn that may not be caused by a nutrient deficiency. It may have something to do with what they're spraying. So before making up your mind and any analysis when doing a consult, make sure you ask them, are you spraying? If the answer is yes, what are you spraying and how often? And you might even check the process that they go through. Do you water the day before and do it early in the morning? Do you water in the morning and do it late in the afternoon? So you want to check those things out as well, because they could have an effect on what's going on in the plant itself. Excuse me. A little memory aid. Here's our friend Webfoot. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Remember the phrase up, down, and all around. The first number is up, the second is down, the third is the all around. So we have up, nitrogen promotes growth above the ground. Down, phosphorus promotes good, healthy roots. And all around, potassium benefits the entire plant. So a quick memory aid. And the final word to remember, roses and children have this in common. Feed them a well-balanced diet, and they will grow strong and healthy and reach their full potential. And that's it. We can go to questions from here, I think.